It turns out one of the hardest things to do is to get people to care.
Yeah.
And I've gotten really lucky being at places that, by the nature of their business, have to and do care an immense amount. It was weird, like going from the lab. At the lab, everyone cares about security, but no one knows about technology. So if you teach someone a better technical practice to be more secure, they'll accept it and they'll be like, oh, I've learned, right? But at RSA, I have a lot of technologists who care a lot about security. So imagine not only having to make cybersecurity calls, but then being questioned by some of the industry experts on those calls.
Welcome to the Head of the Breach podcast, where we talk everything offensive security. I'm here with Lorenzo from RSA. Lorenzo has been working in technology since his childhood. Directly out of high school, he went to work for Los Alamos National Laboratory. Now he's currently with RSA. Lorenzo, welcome to Head of the Breach.
Thanks, Casey. Happy to be here.
When I was taking a look at you and in your background, I think it's kind of really interesting where you worked, before RSA and then the things that you've done at RSA, right?
Yeah.
What can you speak to those things? I think listeners would be kind of interested, just reading your background and would want to learn more.
Yeah, well, I would say that I've been a hacker since I was a baby. And, like earliest childhood memories, and like it's still the stuff my family brings up to this day when they talk about like, yeah, that's our weird kid, we love him. They're talking about when I was a little kid, there was an alarm clock at my grandma's house, and it was like the old type, like you wind it up and you have to stop the ringer in the morning. And the number of times that I took that thing apart and put weird parts in as replacement parts for what it came with.
Yeah.
And like it got to the point where it was probably 20% like weird random classroom supply material. And my grandma was like, I don't know how that clock still functions. And she still has it. It's dead now. And it's in the back of my head as one of those projects that I could return to. But from the earliest age I can remember, I've always wanted to understand, how does this work? Why does it work this way? And how can I make it better? And then it was as I was going through school and starting to learn the technology side, and I really got into, I'm still not a programmer. You're still not going to catch me writing exploits, but I will absolutely fidget with something until I can find out all the different ways it can break. And once I found them out, I'm like, okay, what's my goal here? Do I want to get rid of these vulnerabilities? Do I want to make it so that it's unbreakable? Or do I just, is this a video game and I'm a kid and I just want to keep this way that I found for myself, so that way I have infinite currency or health or whatever it might be? Like, it just applied to that specific situation. When I got into high school, it was really lucky that I went to a high school that specialized in the digital arts and technology. So I got to do an internship in high school where I worked on the IT team for the school. Basically, I was like a technician, and whenever things would come up at school, it would come to the IT director, and then he would delegate it down to a student who was part of the team. All that was is like, hey, I want people to have experience in these sysadmin roles, in tech support roles. I want hands-on experience. I want customer service experience. So I learned very early on, like all those different ways that you deal with users and you deal with peers and you deal with the high level users, right? Because we had students and they get treated differently than teachers, who get treated differently than the people who run the school. And then we also accepted outside customers. So at my school, anybody could bring in their computer for free tech support. It was like a Geek Squad for free. So we would get the wildest stuff, like computers that we would take the side panel off and it's actually just completely filled with animal hair and dust. And it's like, okay, let's just take this back outside. Or just, I don't even know how you get this much malware on an endpoint. Like that kind of, like those sort of situations were where I kind of cut my teeth per se in IT. And then I left high school and I wasn't really sure where I was going. And I got a job at like a tech support call center. And again, it was kind of boring to do the standard routine. So I almost immediately got moved to handling escalations and just handling the weird cases where people would call in and I don't really understand the issue and I don't know how we're going to solve it. And I'm like, cool, let's go.
What age were you? You said this is high school, Lorenzo?
Yeah, so my first official paid job in tech. So like after the high school internship, I was 17 years old when I started working for a call center tech support firm. And that was like supporting hospitals and a government contractor. So right off the bat, I was already like on the one side, I had the healthcare exposure, and on the other side, I had the government exposure. So it was compliance all around, lots of rules. How am I still going to have fun and be a goofy like nerd amongst all the rules, right? So that was like the first challenge, was just learning how to function in those call centers.
Yeah, that's crazy, right out of high school too. And so that probably brought you to your Los Alamos job then, right out of high school?
Yeah. So, I mean, I did that for, I think I started during my senior year at that call center. And then that was my first real job. After I left the call center, I kind of was like, I don't know where I want to go. Just doing that again doesn't seem fun, until I was talking to a recruiter and they said, okay, I know you said no help desk, but I have a help desk job. It pays higher than every other help desk. You're going to work on a lot of really cool stuff, but you have to move away to this little town in the mountains. It's pretty boring there, and you're not going to be able to talk about most of your work.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, sure. Why not? Like,
Why not?
why wouldn't I do that? You know, I was 19 years old, or no, I was 18 years old when I signed my first lease, and I moved out to Los Alamos, just packed it all in my car and drove up there.
I mean, was it the work that intrigued you?
Honestly, I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which I love this place. My heart is here. I was born and raised here, but there's no tech innovation here. So looking for like cool technology projects nearby, it wasn't happening in town. So when someone said, hey, kid with no experience, would you like to come work for the place that invented the nuclear bomb? Sure. Why wouldn't you, you know?
Yeah, we're all this time we're just saying, Los Alamos, but like we should be clear about where
Oh yeah, sorry.
what this is, right?
National Laboratory, like
Yeah.
the original home of the Manhattan Project. It's run by the Department of Energy, the National Nuclear Security Agency. Like they do really cool stuff out there.
Now we're all geeks here, so we're when we hear that we assume that's where you're working for. Now you can't talk about some of this stuff, I'm assuming, but like what could you share with our listeners? Because I mean they'd be really intrigued. Like, I mean, was it highly confidential stuff? Was it more support-based help desk, the typical things that you think of, just different level of security? Give us a little bit of context.
I'll be honest and say that I don't really have any of the cool secrets, and I prefer it that way. Like I'd rather not have anything that I could share.
Right. Because then you'd have to bite your lip on everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And other people who have worked in the space in IT have the same kind of exposure where it's like, yeah, we know we might go to some sites sometimes and we might get into some rooms, but we never know what's happening in the project. We never know what the goal of the project is. Like, we're there and it's the guys who tell us these are the technical mission objectives. These are the parameters. Can we get it done? We say yes or no and do the work. Like there's not really, I don't get to see the data. I just built the system processing it. So When I started up there, I was just on the help desk, and I pretty quickly established myself as like the guy who answers the weird questions.
I love
so I was the guy who had I had a bunch of machines on my desk running every operating system I had so far found at the lab. All these there's a couple like esoteric old Linux operating systems that used to be used for scientific instruments that it's like, hey, we need to figure out how this stuff works. I kind of established myself as the guy who's ready to take that issue, like dig down and find the core of it, and then provide that solution.
Were they mostly Linux based distros or?
Well, it depends. Like I'd say the whole world is Windows, really. Most everything's Windows. So that was what I really focused on. But then when I got into the scientific side, when I left the help desk, it was a nosedive into Linux, and I don't think I saw a start bar for like 3 years until I started RSA. It was just like, I'm out of the Windows game. I got 2 MacBooks at the time. I didn't even have Windows at home. It was just full switch.
What's the craziest thing that you've experienced there that obviously you could talk about, or just maybe a fascinating story?
Man, I gotta say, so the thing that I preach about the most in all of security, and the thing that I'm like it always comes back to, is the human element. It always comes back to the person. It always comes back to the culture, the community, the understanding. The most interesting thing at a place like Los Alamos is everyone's top priority is security. So like that out of the gate, it's not a concern. If I say we need to do this because of security, they will do it. I don't know how to better describe it. It's Los Alamos.
So many of our listeners are like, geez, only if my corporation operated that way.
Right? And you feel that way, but there's also a lot of things like, so Los Alamos was where one of the first supercomputers was built. So the Roadrunner supercomputer in the very early 2000s was at Los Alamos National Labs. And that was the first time, I don't remember what speed limit that one broke, but it was like the first to break a certain barrier. I had the really cool opportunity to work for that company after the help desk. So after I was on the help desk for about a year and a half, I got a call from an amazing guy who founded and works at the organization that does all the high performance computing. And I recognized his name from a weird story that I'll tell you in a minute. And he basically said, "Hey, are you that guy that I talked to before?" And I said, "I'm that guy that you talked to before."
The guy that answers the weird questions.
It's actually way older than that. You're gonna love the story. And he's like, I'm that guy. And he goes, "Okay, well, let's hire you then. I don't really care. Like, I'm gonna find a way to hire you over to my team. You tell me what the salary is. I'll see if I can get it." And 3 weeks later, I was working as a systems integration technician for a bioinformatics team, which is like genetic code. And if you know what bioinformatics is, I guess that's the best word to describe it, but it's just the information of biology. When I went over there, I got to work on like the small compute systems. They're still supercomputers technically, but they're smaller. Those were all used to process that data, all the bioinformatic information. So that's where I got to learn all about like Illumina DNA sequencers that take up half a room, that can parse the entire human genome, that output 140 terabytes of data in one long read, that has to stream continuously to our parallel file system that then processes the data as it's being read. Like, those are the systems that I got to then learn, I guess, Linux on. Like, I learned Linux as a kid, and then I got to really learn enterprise in there. So
that's a different beast, right?
A lot of really cool projects.
Feels like the same shell, but it's actually totally different with the power underneath and the things that you're using Linux for.
What was super cool is it unintentionally helped me get used to what the cloud looks like. Because in high performance computing, the old way of doing it was before like Nutanix got big and we were literally spreading apart architecture. So I would have racks and racks and racks of compute, which are servers that do not have any permanent storage in them. Like, there are no disks.
Is that for security because you need to work on those because you shouldn't have access to that data? Is it because it's just
performance?
That's okay.
So my storage array needs to be able to read and write at a terabit per second raw. And that also has to support a function called multiple parallel input output, because I have thousands of compute nodes that are running calculations against this data at the same time. I still don't I had a storage guy that told me the math one time on how all that stuff works, and it still just hurts when I think about it. But those were the systems that I got to learn security for, basically. Because I got in there and we were working on systems of all ages, and I can't speak to any specific security issue or, problems, but there were some different security problems that I encountered, and I was like, guys, these are simple. These are fundamental things. Why haven't we solved this issue? And the reply was just like, oh, we just haven't found there's not a good way to do that, or we haven't found the way to do that. So I just felt like, right, I was at home again, right? Where, okay, I have a problem with no solution, no information. Let's go find out how to solve it. So that was kind of how I learned was securing supercomputers. That's what I like to say because it sounds so cool. I'm just like, yeah, I learned cybersecurity by locking down the supercomputers for Los Alamos National Labs. I don't want that to imply that they weren't secure. I think the first layer of security there is a lot of guns. So good luck.
Right.
We're already in a classified data center that has shielding on it to make sure there's no electromagnetic radiation coming out. I'm solving problems on those systems. So they were already pretty secure to other layers.
So there's no YouTube browsing when you're working at the help desk
The help desk, actually, yeah, the help desk wasn't classified. So
okay, all right. So it's only when you stepped into supercomputer arena data center that your security probably was up leveled, right?
Well, anybody who's ever worked for DOE before, there's a barrier when you're going to cross from an insecure area to a secure area, and outside of them, they have lockers where you don't get to take anything. You get your identification badge and maybe your wallet if it doesn't have anything electronic in it. But like even most devices, if they were capable of Bluetooth, they didn't go behind that barrier, whether or not it was on.
And did you need to have a security clearance?
Yeah, most of the people at the lab have clearances. And then there's different rules. Depends on the work you're doing. Sometimes you do need one and sometimes you don't. So if you're looking to get into government contracting, keep in mind you don't always need it. They can likely get you an escort at the beginning and help find you a clearance. So don't let that shy away if you're trying to get in. Sorry, I just remember like when I was very first looking this up, I was like, I don't have a clearance. This thing seems impossible to get. And it wasn't. You just find a job that doesn't require it, and then they'll give you one.
Oh, there you go. That's the pro tip of the day.
The pro tip. I can tell you where the funny story, because I love this story. When I was 12 years old, I applied to a job from Craigslist.
This could go many different ways, Lorenzo.
So I was
on the edge of my seat.
Craigslist as a child, as you should be. And I was looking at job listings because my mom said, if you want a MacBook, you have to buy it. Ridiculous. But so I start looking at jobs. And I found this job, and it was for a junior IT support engineer position. And I was like, cool, I can do everything that's on this list. I write up a resume. I wrote in, I don't have experience. I'm 12. I wish I still had the resume because it would be so funny, but I wrote it and I sent it in. And this guy emails me back incredulously like 2 hours later. And he's just like, I'm not sure if you're joking, but I would love to have an interview. If you're actually 12, I probably can't hire you, but with your parents' permission, I would still love to do an interview because I've got to meet you. So like 3 days later, I convinced my mom, and she's like, this is the weirdest thing I could imagine. Why is my child's son doing a job interview at a data center? Like, this just doesn't make sense. So she drives me to like the big colo data center downtown Albuquerque. I have to go through the security checkpoint, and security's like, why is there a 12-year-old at the door and like no escort or anything? Like I went and rang the doorbell and I was just like, hi, I'm here to see so-and-so. They went and got him. And he's like, oh my gosh, you're actually a 12-year-old. That's crazy. Come on in. So we go into the data center. He toured me around. This is my first time seeing a data center, by the way. So I'm like melting. As a kid, I'm like, this is
You're
so
probably
cool.
like a kid in a candy store, right? You're just like eyes wide, just holy crap. I remember my first data center, and I was not 12. I was probably more like 16, 15, 16. And even then I was like, wow, this is crazy.
Yeah. And you don't know what anything is. And it's like, whoa, this stuff's got to be so cool. And now that I think back about it, I'm like, I think he showed me a telco exchange. Like it was a few switches and a ton of interconnects. Like still wasn't anything that cool, but it looked so awesome. So they get me to the conference room and they start the interview. He goes, okay, I have one of the guys who helped create the original IP stack. I have like one of those, like, I have one of these old internet guys, tech OGs, and he would like to interview you. Are you cool with that? And I was like, yeah, why? Well, yeah, I'm here for an interview. Let's go. So this guy comes in and he's like, walk me through setting up a lamp stack. And I was 12 and I had like a full ego at the time too.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, Linux, Apache, MySQL, Perl, first of all.
But I was just going to say,
would you prefer PHP?
Yeah, I was just going to say, at that age, do you know what a lamp stack is?
Yeah. So my response was actually
awesome.
Oh yeah, I can speak to the Linux, Apache, MySQL, Perl stack, unless you prefer PHP. Like I said something to that effect, and he's like, go on, kid. And I'm just like, well, I prefer to start by doing a database because it's easiest to get the database out of the way, get your creds written down, and then you make sure it's secured. Then I would go into the Apache side, build whatever website I'm trying to run. And if I need a scripting engine, then I'll add Perl or PHP on later to interface with the data. And he's like, how do you know what all of this means? Like, what's going on here? And they just kept going deeper and deeper on the technical questions. They're like, okay, what are the 7 layers of the OSI model? And like, I couldn't recite them in order, and I still can't. I have a Network Plus. I still can't. But I can probably get the 7, and I know what they do. So he was like, good enough, and it just went through different iterations of how would you solve this problem? How would you build this? How would you build solutions toward this? And then it ended with like, cool, you're more technically competent than a lot of the adult candidates we've interviewed, but since you're a child, we can't hire you. And then when I was 19 and working at Los Alamos National Labs, that same man who I had met so long ago and forgotten about, when I recognized his name, I was like, hey, are you the guy from Albuquerque? Do you remember interviewing a child about 10 years ago or 6 years ago? And he goes, no way. Like that was the reconnect. And we had a great partnership until I left Los Alamos after that. It was awesome.
So he was working at Los Alamos too, and that's where you ran into him?
Yes. So like all he does is he runs a business that builds supercomputers for the various labs. So he does it at Sandia and Oak Ridge and Los Alamos. And I just encountered him from a Craigslist ad in Albuquerque looking for a data center tech when I was a kid. And he remembered me.
That is a fascinating story.
The reconnect is crazy.
It is. So fast forward to today and you're at RSA, and what are you doing there?
Oh man, I just have a lot of fun. I gotta say, like my management probably doesn't love the description when I say that my job at RSA is to make sure that everything is locked down and we have fun doing it. I just think it's not worth doing if it's not fun, you know?
Yeah, that goes for any job, right?
So we find our enjoyment in I'm the senior manager for Converged Security. Officially, that involves overseeing all of the physical and cybersecurity operations at RSA. We kind of converged them in order to help bring those operations into one running mode. But that encompasses vulnerability management, incident response, endpoint security, cloud security, product and application security is an adjacent to my team that I work with and support. We cover all of the areas of security for RSA.
Nice. And we like to talk a lot about proactive, offensive security on this podcast. What are you guys doing at RSA for, any type of offensive or proactive security?
Well, we have inside and outside red teaming, and it covers, all the different areas. You cover your product, you cover your support infrastructure, you cover the code directly. It's a little bit different being a cybersecurity company serving cyber customers than just being a provider. And I apologize if this sounds salesy or if it sounds like a shtick, but RSA secures the most secure. Our customer base is banks, governments, hospitals, stuff like that. So we have just a different posture than a lot of other companies, and we have to deal with it in a different way.
Yeah. Your customers care about security. It's not like,
yeah, exactly.
And those are the customers that we actually enjoy working with, right? As the ones that actually care about security. And that seems to be this theme that you have all through your career, is that you work for places that truly care about cybersecurity.
It turns out one of the hardest things to do is to get people to care. Yeah. And I've gotten really lucky being at places that, by the nature of their business, have to and do care an immense amount. It was weird, like going from the lab. At the lab, everyone cares about security, but no one knows about technology. So if you teach someone a better technical practice to be more secure, they'll accept it and they'll be like, oh, I've learned, right? But at RSA, I have a lot of technologists who care a lot about security. So imagine not only having to make cybersecurity calls, but then being questioned by some of the industry experts on those calls.
Oh, yeah. Right. Like, why'd you choose this cipher over this one? That's the first thing that comes to my mind when you say RSA and like talking about security and the technology, right? Like, yeah, I mean,
the number of calls that I have to be on about cipher mismatches or cipher policies, it's like, guys,
everyone has
we're talking about crypto that's fundamentally uncrackable with conventional computing. Like, we're this far apart on algos. It's okay.
Yeah. I would just love to be a fly on the wall for some of those conversations, right? I'm sure they go pretty geeked out real quick and pretty deep dive real quick, right?
And then the shortest version I can give about RSA since I've been here, when I joined, we were a subsidiary of Dell. We also comprised of like 5 separate parts of our business at the time. Today, RSA is its own separate or privately owned entity that is not part of the other businesses anymore. So we used to have a SIEM, a GRC tool, a fraud tool, and our identity product. Plus we ran the conference. Today, RSA has boiled down and just focused on identity. So like we kind of had those other things out. But when I started, I worked with a gentleman who had the title of the log father. This guy was one of the best people as far as log parsing and management ever. And I got to learn a lot of that from him. So when it came back to doing that strategy for RSA itself, I had that of resources and I was able to go back and be like, hey man, I know you know a thing or two about logs. I have this weird challenge I need to solve. So it's all about connections, man. I mean,
has that made your job easier because you are surrounded by so many experts in security, so many experts in general and technology that you know when you come up against a challenge, you're working at a place where you have resources to get deep brightest minds, together to help solve it? Has it made it easier or has it made it tougher?
It depends on the problem. Sometimes, and it really depends, because sometimes you're trying to solve a problem that people aren't aware of or not passionate about. And it's pretty easy to just gather the solutions from the right people and push that solution through. But when I'm working on something like identity security, or we're talking about something like identity security, that is our one thing. So when we're making decisions on how we want to make configurations of our internal identity or how we want to run that, that's where those conversations, I wouldn't say it's easier, but I would say it's a much stronger conversation because we have the most experts on that. Like, these people theorize and design and architect, and they're part of the identity alliances and foundations. And then they kind of help us guide on how to implement. But it can be hard because sometimes they want Fort Knox and we still have to be able to move around in here,
Yeah. So Lorenzo, what do you use for your identity and multi-factor? I see you have, I see you on the wall. You have some cards, you have some tokens, you have a lot of different fobs. Like, what are you using today?
RSA. It's my preference.
Of course.
I will admit, I don't know any of the alternatives nearly as deep as I do RSA, so it's biased.
Hey, that's fine. That's fine. Long as it works, right? Like,
yeah.
Well, what are, for those that are listening, they're like, hey, identity is this thing I'm working on that I'm trying to solve. We got a lot of CISOs that listen, a lot of practitioners that listen. What are the things that they should be thinking about in identity, whether it's RSA or anyone? Like, what should they be thinking about in identity moving forward?
I'm glad you asked. I think that identity is one of the two most important pillars of cybersecurity. And I'll stand by that. I think when you're talking identity, the most important things to keep in mind, it does matter what system you use. Please use a good one. Please make sure whatever system you're using is, well-reviewed, trusted, they have secure practices, they take care of their stuff. Like, use a good system. But outside of that, there are multiple good options out there. We all have strengths, we all have our weaknesses. And the important parts are, when you implement a digital security program or a digital identity program, you are focusing on proving that that person is who they say they are. So that starts from, an early onboarding level. At the very beginning, when your employees get hired, how do you prove that the person receiving that first username and password is the person you hired? Can you like that's one of the first things, is identity proofing, right? So with offices, that was a lot easier. You come in, you get your laptop, you get your creds, you're in the building. We know it's you. But we're a remote first company. If you get hired at RSA, you're being hired remote, except for a very small number of jobs. And we had to, we need to prove identity. So we have identity proofing where you can validate with liveness. Here's my valid government ID that the provider we work with has a ton of checks in place for. This is a real, current, valid ID. This person is real, alive, and not being faked. All those different things kind of go into, okay, now we've verified on the very first step, this person is who they say they are. One step. The next is making sure that anytime they authenticate, they are who they say they are. And then you build that into your model and your risk architecture as anytime someone is doing a sensitive transaction, or anytime the context of an interaction changes, let's revalidate the identity. So your identity platform should have a risk system that can continuously identify and analyze changes or anomalies in the context of user interaction. I realize that's very vague. So
I do have some follow-up questions on that, right? Like, you talk about a risk-based system, like, where do I start to develop that, right?
I think a lot of the providers have a lot of really good ways to assist from the beginning. So one thing is splitting up machine identity from user identity. Let's just make sure that that's done off the bat. Do your machines have, can you validate that your machine is your machine independently of a user identity? So that's usually a certificate. That's usually actually not, that's not part of RSA. That's just a part of the identity program, is that machine identity. Then we have user identity. When it comes to risk, the old stuff is IP based. Are they switching IPs a lot? Are the geolocations, are they moving impossibly? Like stuff like that. That doesn't really work anymore, because I might have an employee in Egypt who logs in Oregon and then logs in Europe in a 20-minute span. And it's like, okay, well, none of that location data is relevant, right?
The impossible geo IP situation, right? You can't be in those two places at the same time, or you can't move that fast.
Yeah. So then you want to start integrating, where is the authentication coming from? Are they authenticating from a secured endpoint? Like that's where the machine identity plays in. Can we validate machine identity? Yes. We validate user identity? Yes. Okay. We don't need to do further checks. Like they're coming from their machine, they're on VPN, and they pass two-factor. Now, let's throw some wrenches into that mix. They're not on VPN. They're logging into an application that's on the internet, though, from a new device. Let's do an extra two-factor check, or let's remove the less secure two-factor options. Like there's a lot of different ways that you can play with those toggles, and every product is so different. I just want to hammer home, focus on your identity security, and the other pillar is data security. Yeah. If you can focus on those two things. I saw a meme that really resonated with me right before DEF CON, and it was the air pistols from the Olympics. And it was on one side, the gold medalist with all the gear and the preparation. And they were like, this is the gold. And it was covered in AIXDR and XAM and all the cyber acronyms, right?
Yep.
And then it was like silver medalist, identity security, data security.
Yep.
So you can get 90% of the way there if you just cover the pieces.
Well, like there's so much that you can do with the conditional access, right? That can take you a long way. And out of the box, no matter who your provider is, those things aren't necessarily turned on full tilt, but like you can adjust those quite a bit and have some real good, easy wins.
And I love, there's a lot of solutions out there for like privileged access management that change the game as well. How do we stop privileged passwords from being a problem? Just take them away. Get rid of the like RSA has a passwordless solution. We don't really do PAM as much. I think it's identity and authorization, but the PAM side of the house, the Delinias, the HashiCorps, the Teleport, like those types of solutions where they basically say, hey, we're going to manage all the keys for you. Just make sure the permissions are set right. And now you're basically applying RBAC, and I can just say a host is in this group and anyone in this group has sudo rights. That works with Azure Bastion as well. So without even leaving your cloud, you can just build it right in.
That's powerful. And many times we often say that, identity is the new perimeter, right? We've heard that. We as, pen testers and red teamers like to say that to just drive that point in that, it's not necessarily firewalls anymore. Although don't ignore that. But that just goes to show you the importance of identity.
And that's why I think that meme was actually very accurate, because
it was.
It's still it's saying, hey, this is a silver medal. Like you can get pretty good, but you're not gold yet. Yeah. If you want to get to gold, you're going to have to put in some acronyms. It's going to get complicated.
Yeah.
But we can get to silver. We can get most of the way there with strong identity and strong data. But as a red teamer, it's really frustrating when someone has a good identity implementation, because you basically can't get into any of the holes because it's one login that you can't compromise.
Yeah. And it takes you to, I need to compromise this workstation, right? Which in a remote first, and then you build your conditional checks into the actual workstation as well too. Like it becomes more difficult.
And hopefully if you're using your remote first and you're, cloud-based, you should have some security orchestration going at that point. So even then it's like, hey, as soon as there's even the lightest hint of something suspicious, shut it down. I just sever its head. We don't our people are very comfortable and understanding of, we're going to cut. As soon as we have safely identified and can record that information, we are sandboxing, isolating, and wiping it out. It happens so quickly.
It's a different game. It's a different game from when you were setting up LAMP stacks.
Yeah, when you set up LAMP stacks, and even seeing in the way incident response was when I was at the lab, I had the opportunity of being like, hey, can I come check out the SOC and see what it looks like in the day? And it's like, yeah, we pull the ticket out, pull up my set, very slow, right?
Yeah.
One ticket, one SEM. I'm going to go find the data. Yeah, this looks like false positive. Flag it as false positive. Next, it's like, okay, our SOAR does that instantly. It processes in seconds.
What are some of the attacks and risks that you're seeing right now just by working at RSA? And not necessarily attacks on RSA, but like with identity in general or other areas that you have privy to?
I want to say that the biggest risk that I see in the identity field is fraud. And I don't mean this cool Madoff stuff. I mean, I'm sending an email and spoofing the reply to and display emails, and that's still working.
Sad.
The identity problems, like, sure, there's people who need to enable MFA. I can hammer all of those home, but everyone else says them. If you Google, how do I build an identity program? You're going to get all of those. The ones that I want to talk about are to build a security culture and to build an environment where your users are comfortable verifying identities. Because
users are comfortable.
Everybody, every employee everybody in the organization should be comfortable enough to call whoever it is they got an email from and say, "Did you just send this?"
How do you foster that? How do you build that?
Just do it. You just have to start doing it.
Yeah. Like,
and you have
show
to,
by example of doing it, training, teaching.
There's a lot of things. So when I started at RSA, I didn't work for the internal organization. I started as a consultant for NetWitness, which was our SEM product.
Okay.
And I would go to other organizations to help them implement and utilize the product better. I got a lot of experience building security culture being that consultant, because most often the problem with a SEM or any given security tool is that people aren't using it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people can speak to that who have worked with security tools in the past is that, hey, we're not sure if there's anything wrong with it, but we just haven't used it. So sure enough, you take it off the shelf, there's some cobwebs, there's some dust, but once we get it moving again, it's like, okay, there's nothing wrong with it, guys. Let's get in here. And it's almost always just, we didn't know it could do that. We didn't know how to do that. And we were scared to say something about it. So at RSA, you're going to find things, and I did this at customer sites. I don't know how many of them kept it up, but things like brown bag open talks, where we just do an online Zoom call or Teams meeting over lunch where we're going to talk about a security topic. Or it might be an open floor to let someone else bring up their security topic because we're a security org. It's really just like, let's have regular communications and facilitate those connections so that way everyone feels comfortable. It's to the point where even our top people, all those C-levels, if they get those weird phishing emails, they'll forward them to they report them properly as phishing emails. But then they'll separately ping either myself or an incident response team member and say, "I just received this one. Something about it is different. Could you just check?" But it's that one-to-one. It's a very specific culture that you have to build where people are comfortable to interact, and they don't feel like terrorized by the security team.
Right. I mean, the thing that we've found to be pretty successful is, you put the button right in the client, right, to report the
Yep.
fish, and the review happens, and then boom, it's pulled out of everyone's inboxes. Like, that allows you to accelerate and to be fast. But if you're on your phone, you don't have that capability or something like that, then yes, they should be able to pick up the phone and call someone and say, "This is not right." And the same thing should happen.
Those little pieces are what I love when people bring up, because that shouldn't be a problem anymore.
Right.
Outlook mobile client and the Gmail mobile client both have the option to report phishing through Microsoft and Google's phishing report tools. If you're using an outside tool with Microsoft, I don't remember if it was Anomaly or PhishMe, but one of them, even in the mobile app, they're still going to add their button, but you have to go enable it. So there's a lot of security practitioners who, they buy the product, they implement it, they say, okay, I turned on the Microsoft report phishing button, good luck. But are you going back through and reviewing them? Are you submitting them to Microsoft? We love to do that. I love that little, "this is Microsoft's problem" button. Go through some of those operations.
Any more of those buttons. This is my problem.
Yeah, or I've already determined that I've removed it from my tenant. Now it's your problem.
Yeah.
But I think the only way that we win as a larger cybersecurity community is you have to foster that culture inside, and then you have to foster the culture outside. Because I'm a cybersecurity company, but we have no problem sharing our intelligence or information with other vendors. Like, when it makes sense, Microsoft, they're responsible for securing half the earth or something. So it seems fair to tell them, "Hey, these are what we find to be phishing emails. Please add this to your catalog."
Right.
That's not going to hurt anybody. It's only going to help others who are having the same issue, and it ultimately helps us too.
Yeah, absolutely. In the past 5 years, the things that we've seen just by, at Sprocket, when we do social engineering exercises, specifically in phishing, we work like the real operators, low and slow, but like we have one campaign and we're not just, we can blast it to as many, customers or clients that we want, or we can be specific. But when we blast it to many customers and someone reports that phishing and it goes through and it burns the domain, burns the sender and everything like that, and they share that data across multiple customers, that significantly hurts us, right? As threat actors, because we can't, that's burned now. That whole campaign, that whole infrastructure, it's burned. That pretext burned, all of it is burned. And it takes a significant amount of time to build that nowadays because we've advanced in technology. So there's one area that I feel like we've gotten really good at in the past, I'd say 7 years. It's probably on detecting the phishing and reporting on it and actually doing something about it in real time. However, we still have some gaps, as you pointed out earlier, right? Like there's, why can I still spoof and this gets through? Oh, someone didn't turn on the controls. The out of box config happens, at least where we see it, happens in, the email gateways and a lot of the endpoint protections, right? Like endpoint protection, when you do the demo, all levels are turned up to max, all the bells and whistles are turned on. When you install it out of the box in your real corporate environment, that's not the case because that
I'm talking
business.
I have a question for all the email admins out there. Is your DMARC set to reject yet?
Yeah.
Be honest.
Yeah, that's a great question. DMARC and also appropriately setting the 2 between, SPF as well.
Well, you need DKIM and SPF in place in order to enforce DMARC, but like I can do it with Proton Mail and my own domain in 15 minutes. You have no excuse.
Yes.
If your excuse is, well, we use Salesforce or we use this other business tool that needs to send emails, okay, then add a second record or buy a second domain. I mean, it makes so much more sense to me to say, I don't want anything else to send from rsa.com other than an employee or a product.
Right.
If it's something else, like if it's an internal tool that needs to send a notification, why isn't it rsa-systems.com? Like,
right.
Or just an internal domain that we know whatever that internal domain that we use, it should be something separate.
Yes.
The same goes for your contractors and vendors. Are they able to send email as though they were an employee of your organization? Or is there something that explicitly delineates them as a contractor?
Yeah.
Those are all like identity pieces.
Great question to make people stop and think about, like, how is ours configured, right? Like when I receive email and it comes from the root domain and it's marketing, for example, like it kind of gives me a little
why
insight.
are you doing that?
Yeah, it gives me a little insight as to like what's going on there.
But also, sounds like if I get into your MailChimp, I can probably phish your people. Like,
yeah.
That's always my first thought is I'm like, thank God you didn't send it from List Manage or anything like that,
Hey, we need to go back to the olden days, right? BBS and
no. I just got my invite to a private conference and it's email list based. That was a throwback. I was like, it's what based?
Remember when they were invite only, right? You had to know someone and vouch for someone before you could get on the list too.
So there's a lot of those now. I mean, especially now that we were talking about DEF CON has grown so big. I think they had like 30 or 40,000 people there this year. It felt huge. I don't remember what Jeff's number was. I didn't go to closing, but even with that number of people, there's a lot, like we still need a place for the talks that used to happen at DEF CON.
Yes.
Here are the crimes I have committed on the internet today. Like those types of talks still need to be shared in the community because that was the place where the person who broke the bank goes and tells the person who runs the bank security how to fix it. No one in the room's malicious. Like, I'm not trying to rob the bank. I was just bored, whatever it was. Like, those are the places that those conversations happen. So it's really good that they still have invite only in those closed community spaces, I think.
Yeah, it's really great. Lorenzo, it was great chatting with you. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I just build good relationships and then you're gonna go far. I mean, there's not been anything I've found to be more valuable than being friendly and positive in security. I hate saying it, because it sounds like so cliche and it's like, oh, just be a nice guy. Genuinely, if you are nice to people and you're understanding of your employees and your users, and you're there to help them work securely, not to stop them from working in a secure way, then Everyone's going to make friends and it's going to get a lot better.
That's so true. Wise words, like remember, have empathy, smile, even when we have to say no or point out a flaw, you can do it with, a nice, cool, calm demeanor and put yourself in other people's shoes and, just be nice to each other.
Just remember that in every case, a real user is not trying to harm the company. There are mad users that then become threats, and there are fake users that are threats. But any non-disgruntled employee is making a mistake when you get an alert. It is not something to be mad at them for. It's just something to educate them on.
It's great. Lorenzo, thanks for coming on to the podcast. If someone wants to follow the work that you're doing or get in touch with you, how should they do so?
Thank you. LinkedIn is probably the best way. It's where I'm most responsive. The other social media I like to forget about. It's easier. So LinkedIn /Lorenzo Sec. But if you just search Lorenzo Pedroncelli on LinkedIn, I'm the only one. So
thanks, Lorenzo. It's great chatting with you.
Thanks, Casey.